All right, Econ friends, welcome back. In our last video, we introduced broadly the idea of money, and specifically we looked at what money does, its functions, the commodity versus fiat money distinction, and then we kind of moved into discussing the value of money. And we broadly said that money, like any other good or service, has a value determined by supply and demand. Okay, we had some extensions there. In this video, what we're going to do is take that idea about the supply and demand for money, the value of money, and extend it a little bit. Okay, so to get ready for this one, get yourselves mentally thinking about the supply and demand model that you learned a while back. And instead of, again, beer and nachos and orange juice and college education, you just put money in. I know it's hard to think. It's kind of confusing because you think that you use money to buy things in markets. But there is also a market for money. There is money demand and there's money supply. Let's jump in. So like I said, there is money demand, money supply. The supply and demand for money can be illustrated in a specific market model known as the loanable funds market. The loanable funds market is basically a market for money. In this market, borrowers demand money. Okay, when you borrow, what you're basically saying is, I don't have enough money on hand to purchase the thing that I want. So you're going to borrow money. That is a demand for money. So in the loanable funds market, in the market for money, people who want to borrow are the demanders. And within this, the people who have extra money, who aren't consuming enough to, well, I shouldn't put it that way. The people who are consuming less than they're able to, they're going to have some excess money, some excess cash. They're going to lend it out. They're the suppliers, okay? And if you look here, you can see we have a typical supply-demand graph. This is simply the supply and demand for money. We see the supply of money here. This comes from savers. Notice that there's a connection between saving and investment, okay? There's a connection between saving and investment. People who do not fully consume to their limit because they have extra money, that's savings, that money is tied in to the amount that others can borrow, okay? So there's a supply of savings and there's a demand as well. There's a demand for money. So, sorry, there's a supply of money from savings, and there's a demand for money, primarily for companies or people to invest in things, to consume or to invest in capital, okay? You have here the P, which is the price, and down here the Q. You have an interest rate. And what that interest rate fundamentally is the price of money. So the market for loanable funds is the market for money. There's a supply of money, which comes from savers. There's a demand for money, which comes from borrowers. The supply and the demand, they're going to meet, as always, at equilibrium, like any other market. The equilibrium quantity, when you bring it down, will tell you how much money will be lent and borrowed in that market. But the critical takeaway from the loanable funds market is this: the price of money. You know that equilibrium leads to an equilibrium price. In this case, the price of money is the interest rate. The equilibrium of the supply and demand in the loanable funds market will generate the interest rate. That's the crucial takeaway here. Let's reduce this back down to size. That's the crucial takeaway. In the loanable funds market, the interest rate is the price. You can think, therefore, as interest rates. being number one, the price that borrowers have to pay in order to get money now. And you can think of the interest rate as the reward or payments that lenders get for reducing their current spending so that they can loan those funds to someone else. There's a lot going on here. It's a lot to chew on. Maybe you pause the video and you kind of think about it. Understand who is demanding money and why. Understand who has the capacity to lend it and why. Put those in terms of supply and demand analysis. But at the end of it all, the takeaway is that in a loanable funds market, the price of money is the interest rate. Okay? One quick little thing tied to earlier discussions on inflation. The interest rate that occurs typically in a loanable funds market is the nominal interest rate. We do adjust that from nominal down to real, just like we did with GDP, for example, okay? The real interest rate is equal to the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. Because like any economic variable, we have to adjust for inflation effects. That's going from nominal to real. So as a technical aside, we can speak of the nominal interest rate, but more accurate is the real interest rate. Now, here's what's really important to take away. Since the interest rate is fundamentally a price, it serves like any other price. It sends signals. It encapsulates information. And critically, it serves as an incentive. We had said way back in price theory and those theories of efficiency of markets that money plays many roles and it does many things. It sends signals, conveys information, aligns buyers and sellers together, but critically, money and prices serve as incentives. In a loanable fund market, the interest rate most strongly is an incentive for borrowers. If the interest rate increases, this makes money more expensive. It means it costs more to borrow. The opportunity cost of taking out a loan goes up. And as you would predict, increases in the interest rate, being a price increase, they will discourage consumption and discourage investment. On the other hand, decreases in the interest rate, they reflect a cheaper money. The prices have gone down, and therefore the signals and the incentives follow. A decrease in the interest rate makes money cheaper, and this encourages more consumption and more investment. Okay? You can see this in a couple of panels. We see here in panel A, we have a loanable funds market, a money market at equilibrium, starting right here. We have the initial interest rate. Well, let's say that something happens. Maybe there's a decline in confidence, there's higher taxes or whatever, but there's some sort of a decline in investment. Shifting the curve down, well, you're going to get a new equilibrium and you're going to have a lower interest rate. You can also see over here that if the demand for money increases, you're going to shift from one equilibrium to another, and interest rates will rise. You can also see this when it comes on the savings, aka the supply side. You have, for example, a loanable funds market. You have an initial equilibrium here with an initial interest rate. And let's say that something happens. There's higher taxes on savers, there's a larger government deficit, there's other structural factors that somehow decrease the savings supply. Well, that's going to reflect a leftward shift to a new supply curve. And like any market, that new equilibrium reflects a higher interest rate. And you can see the same thing over here. If there is something that incentivizes savings, that allows or encourages people to save more, you're going to get an increase in your savings, a shift to the right in your supply curve. And like any increase in supply, that would have a reduction in price, AKA a drop in the interest rate. Okay, so that's how this thing behaves. It's fairly straightforward. One thing that I want to do before we end this video is I want to make sure you understand the supply and demand factors of money in the loanable funds market. Pretty straightforward. But I really want to tie this together with the idea of incentive. At its core, it's critical that you walk away with an understanding that the interest rate, AKA the price of money, is an incentive. It strongly influences people's behavior. What people are we speaking about? Well, we're speaking about two groups in particular. We're speaking about consumers, and we're speaking about businesses. If interest rates fall and it becomes cheaper to take out a loan, that's going to increase the incentives for both consumers and businesses to take out loans. They will take out more loans and they will spend more money. Hold tight for that one for a bit. On the other end, if interest rates rise, it becomes more expensive to borrow. Money is now more expensive. You have to pay back more. The opportunity cost of borrowing goes up. And as a result, consumers and businesses will both spend less. Okay? So we know that we have consumers and businesses, that they're affected by interest rates. So now the question is, well, what does this all mean? How do we put it together? And to answer that, we have to go back to the model that I taught you early on in our macro time. Y, which was real GDP, you recall, had a couple of core components. We had said that Y equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Obviously, if C and I and G and X minus M combine to give us Y, our real output, interest rates are going to be a key factor. And why is that? Well, because remember, it is consumer spending that is C. And it is business spending that is I. So together, consumer spending and business spending are a significant part, a big part of a country's output, of a country's real GDP, of a country's production, of a country's wealth. And since C and I, consumer and business spending, are such critical parts of output and of a country's wealth, and if interest rates play such a strong role in the incentives underneath consumer spending and business spending, you put all that together and you see that fundamentally interest rates are going to play a big part, among many other factors for sure, but by themselves, interest rates will play a big part in a country's output, standard of living, and wealth. Once you understand that, then all these different things here about the supply of money, demand of money, they all fall into place. Fundamentally, we go back to our key formula, Y equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. We start understanding the importance of C and I. We understand the importance of interest rates as an influence on C and I. And now we understand that money supply and money demand and their interaction affects interest rates. There's a lot going on, I understand. A lot of terms, a lot of technical stuff. Hopefully, as you parse through this and do your readings and watch these videos and practice some questions, you build up a model of how these different things layer on each other so that you start to build a really comprehensive grasp of not just the separate parts of macro, but about how those parts tie together in a country's overall well-being. Okay? In our next video, we're going to jump from this into the final part, the real technical part of our discussion, monetary policy and the role of the financial system and specifically banks. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in a bit.